type of victory to sell to the U.S. people. For example, when it started, it was regime change, right? We need to change the regime. That's what he said day one. Then it quickly said, okay, maybe, let's get the uranium. All right, now, okay, we can't do that. Why don't we just return? Now the goal of the war is to return it to how it was February 27th, which was quite remarkable when Marco Rubio said that's the new goal of the war. So I don't see a situation where the United States can get a victory. I mean, they're not going to get one on the battlefield, but they can't even spin one to the American people, because there's nothing that we're looking at right now that actually justifies in our eyes, okay, wow, we've actually made some changes. Okay, we actually won this war. The best thing is we could probably just cut our losses and get the heck out of the region. And, hopefully that would restore some order to that. Professor, I want to, what I love about your insights is you're on the ground there. So I'd like to know what the people are thinking, and kind of, we talked about last time on our show is that we know that the MOU really wasn't going to last. I think, kind of everybody knew it was a little bit of a facade. Okay, yes, it allowed some oil to get through the strait temporarily. There was a couple weeks there where the pressure valve was released, but it's a temporary pressure valve. The situation is certainly not resolved. What is the sentiment going on right now in Tehran? What are people thinking? Last time we had chatted, we thought a lot of people were expecting another attack from the United States. And I think that's certainly, what a lot of people are speculating, that there might be some type of ground invasion in the future and an escalation. What are people thinking right now in Tehran? What is the sentiment going on in Iran?
Well, for your viewers, who I'm sure many of them being suspicious of Western narratives and mainstream media narratives, I'm sure they followed the funeral in Tehran and in the holy cities of Qom and Mashhad, and also in the Iraqi cities of Najaf and the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. And they saw the tens of millions of people who participated in the funeral in the height of summer, under very difficult circumstances. A lot of these, millions of these people, are people who are struggling as a result of the war. When you have siege, when you have maximum pressure sanctions, when the United States bombs hospitals and schools and factories and so on, it's obviously going to have all of this is going to have a major economic impact. But people went to the funeral to make a statement, both out of admiration to their martyred leader, but also to send a message to the Americans, to its allies, that we're going to remain steadfast. So it's clear what the sentiments are. Yet the United States, as I said earlier, they can't move beyond those narratives that they helped build. I think once before on your show, I discussed the book Going to Tehran, which I advise people to purchase and read, or Resistance by Alistair Crook, Going to Tehran by Flint and Hillary Leverett. The reality in Iran is far different from those narratives that exist in the West. And they simply cannot see through those narratives. So just like when they failed in the war, when they look at and they don't learn, when they look at the funerals and the numbers, they try to explain it away in a way in which their narratives are preserved, in a way in which those old and worn out talking points remain valid on their shows or in their articles. So in Tehran, people are resilient, of course, and this is the same across the country. But that doesn't mean that the economic situation is good. The economy is suffering. But at the same time, you see people who know that this is a struggle for their survival, for the survival of the country. They're going to remain steadfast, regardless of what the Americans throw at them. On the other hand, the Iranians have their thousands of years of heritage, of civilization. It is a Shia Muslim country, which makes them particularly resilient against oppression and against the oppressor, and supportive of the oppressed. That's a part of their very key to their religious ideology. And on the other hand, you have the United States that is fighting a war that's not their war. They're fighting for a genocidal regime in West Asia, and the American people are suffering, and there's no benefit. Iran's no threat to the United States. It's no threat to the American people. So the American people don't have a strong incentive to support this war unless they are part of the MAGA cult or they watch Fox News and the nonsense that they say day and night. They don't have that sort of incentive to make sacrifices for a war that means nothing for them, and in fact is just a crime against the Iranian people. So I have, life in Tehran is normal. If I leave home and drive to my campus, there'll be heavy traffic right now, and if you go on the streets, the shops are full. If you go to restaurants, they are full. Doesn't mean though that things are great. That's not the case. But life goes on. Life is normal, but more difficult than before. And one thing that in the West people don't often understand, and across the world, because Western media has a very powerful impact, and this is something that the two of you can well appreciate, as both of you have, lived in China and seen China. Iran is very different from what people think it is. Often when colleagues are invited to Iran or people come to Iran, they think it's a rundown country. Tehran is a poor, impoverished city. Nothing works. Every night they take the rubbish, the trash, every night. The metro stations in Tehran are decades ahead of metro stations in Western countries, for the most part. Those that I've seen in London or New York, decades ahead. Not quite like China. I mean, we have a shortage we don't have enough trains for the population, but the metro stations are absolutely beautiful. We have multiple lines, but because of the sanctions, we don't have enough capacity to move passengers around as we would like. But if you travel through the city of Tehran, it looks like a very advanced and beautiful city. If you go to Esfahan, it is probably one of the most beautiful cities in the world. If you go to the north of Iran, you will see forests. If you go to the northwest of Iran, and forests and mountains full. Iran is not a desert. Iran is a country where you have 4 seasons. During the summer, the south is extremely hot, but in the north and in the mountain areas, it's cool. It's a very diverse country with different languages, with different ethnic groups, and it is a beautiful place. And it's very dynamic. You've seen the Lego. I'm sure you've seen the Lego videos. This is how young people in Iran are innovative. How innovative they are. How smart they are. These young kids who are of the generation that the Americans and the West have been targeting, trying to turn them against the country for the last 10, 15 years. These are the ones who went and created these videos that have done more to dent the American and Western media narrative than anything that people like me could do in 100 years. So it just shows that Iran is very different from that the stereotypical Iran that you read about or you watch on Western mainstream media. I recall, and this I'm just saying it. I'm just saying this sort of like a. It's funny memory that I have. Once I was when I was doing my PhD back then, in my field there wasn't in English literature there wasn't a PhD program in Iran. So I gave a exam here. I got a scholarship. I went to the UK with 4 or 5 other Iranians to do our PhD in literature, English literature, and we were having lunch once at a gathering of a number of us, our families. And it was like the 2 o'clock news in the UK, the BBC. And I said, whenever they talk about Iran, the first thing they do is they show a donkey, like someone walking alongside a donkey. And then the news
Right.
began, and the first, I don't remember what it was about, but it was a report on Iran, and there was this man walking with a donkey. So it's like they depict us as like 50, like we're 100 years behind the rest of the world, that we're a broken country, that we have these mad, crazy, fanatical leaders. You have these mullahs, the ayatollahs. I mean, the government cabinet, there's not a single religious scholar in that cabinet. In the parliament, there are a handful of clerics or religious figures. They're all engineers, and the president is a heart surgeon. The speaker of parliament is an associate professor at my university. It's so the narrative that it exists in the West and which is promoted by the Western media is completely different from the reality on the ground. And as soon as you leave the airport and enter Tehran, you'll figure that out.
Yeah. Professor, Alex, let me add one more thing.
Sure.
And I think it's important before I throw it to you. I want everyone to understand just the importance of these ancient civilizations, because I always draw these comparisons between China and Iran. I've just spent 2 months traveling through China, went to 12 different cities. And one of the things that you'll notice when you're traveling through China is this tremendous pride in the Chinese people that you often hear. They talk about the 5,000 years of history. And, I talk to a lot of people. They know that, once they find out I'm American, we start discussing America's role around the world. They would talk about Iran. And that's something that I think a lot of people understand is when you look at, China, these are two of the oldest civilizations in the world. So there's a tremendous amount of pride, amongst these people. There's a rich and deep history. We have to remember, the United States, we have a history of 250 years. We just celebrated that on July 4th. We're a very young country. And we tend to be a little bit arrogant. We tend to think that we're superior, and this is why it's amazing. I'll share videos on Instagram of China, and people still have that perception. Wow, I can't believe that China is so modern. Similar thing, BBC, that they try to find, the side street, that is a little bit run down. It's like, we're in Beijing today, guys. The bicycles around us. Look at this alleyway, this is the real China. And it's like, okay, you found one random street, no different than if I go to a rundown street in Detroit and say, okay, this is what America is. Okay, yeah, one street does not represent the country. You could easily make a news report. I could make America look like an absolute piece of crap country if I go to the really rundown parts of the city. Or I could go to Beverly Hills and try to say, okay, everything's grand here, right? There's always more nuance. There's always more insights to share. But I want people to understand the amount of pride that is existing in these ancient civilizations. And that's a huge drive, in their survival, because again, this is something that Iranian people have been dealing with for decades and decades. They've been under United States sanctions for, 40, 50 years. This is not something new, for the Iranian people. But I just wanted to add that context in, is just how important these ancient civilizations are, and just how long they've been at this game. They've been at this for a long time. But let me throw it back to Alex here for our next question.
Well, it's more
Before
of a
Alex continues, just one thing, Alex. I think a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I was invited to Guangzhou to an exhibit to the Guangzhou museum, not the city museum, but the province's museum. And it was an exhibition on Iran and China. And they did comparative work between Iran and China. I'm not much of a museum person, unfortunately, but I was really stunned and very impressed. So they were showing how 3,000 years ago, goods were going back and forth between Iran and China by sea. And so let's say a vase would go from Iran to China, and then they'd show vases made in China where they tried to copy the Iranian vase, and they couldn't because there was a special type of sand or whatever used, but they tried. And then the Chinese, someone imported something from China, and then in Iran they would try to imitate it. And this was all of this was happening 3,000 years ago, 3,200 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. That's how old the links between these civilizations are. And this exhibition was not about the Silk Road. It was about Guangzhou. It was about Guangzhou and Iran. So exactly as you put it, these civilizations go back thousands of years, and it has an impact on the way in which countries and people see themselves.
I mean, the relationships are solid. We've seen it today, and I think it will continue moving forward. Now, I want to go up another level here in this live stream and just be honest with the viewers here about economically what's going to happen in North America. I'm going to say it one more time. I have no idea why the Iranians are even in negotiations with the Americans. Why? If you sit down with Jared Kushner, 48 hours, you are assassinated later. That's why I call him the Undertaker. But when it comes to the seriousness of this, is when the Americans, collective West, are going to feel the financial pain, there is no reverse gear here. Now, the American administration always says, well, if we crack the will of the people in Iran, they will overthrow its government and it will crumble. That's not going to happen as far as I can see. But what I can see is, are negotiations going to start up again? If it was me, I couldn't trust the other person sitting across the desk, which is the American administration, to take their word honestly, because they've done the MOU. Next thing you know, 14, 15 days of aerial bombardment happens again. We'll crush them. We'll take the lights out. We've killed all the Navy. I think, honestly, and maybe you can help us out to understand this, is Iran going to go to the point where it will break the global economy and teach finally this aggressive approach from the Americans? Once and for all, you've picked the wrong country this time.
Iran doesn't want to break the global economy. Something that was alluded to earlier when we spoke about ships leaving the Strait of Hormuz. Some ships do go, and they are ships that belong to countries that are friendly to Iran, or that countries that have not been involved. Because Iran does not want to shut down the global economy. It wants a solution, but a just solution. So if Iran wanted to make this crisis worse, all it has to do is just shut it down completely. And then Yemen, too, could shut down the Strait of the Bab el-Mandab completely, just for a couple of weeks. Maybe they could have China as an separate, so that if someone says, well, China is a superpower, I don't think it would change if they shut it down. But let's say they just left it open for China. They could make it much worse. But the Iranians don't want that. They want the Strait of Hormuz to be open. They want business to go back to normal. But the problem is that the United States is simply completely untrustworthy. First of all, as we all know, Iran didn't start the war. Iran never escalated. It wasn't Iran that began bombing critical infrastructure, carrying out war crimes. Even when they began bombing Iranian schools and hospitals, Iran waited for weeks before it began retaliating. And then finally, when they bombed the Iranian South Pars gas field, and Iran had warned them for weeks that, if you do this, we're going to hit back at those regimes that are hosting you. And they struck Qatar's gas field and other installations, but the gas field was the most important, and Trump backed off. So if Iran wanted to bring down the global economy, it could just start bombing all of these countries and destroying their critical infrastructure, their oil and gas installations, their electrical power plants, and these regimes would all collapse. They're desert countries. Everyone would have to leave, and the global economy would immediately collapse. Because, again, the two of you know this much better than I, and correct me wherever I'm wrong, but it would create panic. The manipulation would end immediately. As soon as all these installations are being wiped out, then no matter how ABC or NBC or CBS or MSNBC or the BBC or Fox News tries to frame it, people will, they will see what's going on and the markets will collapse. But Iran doesn't want that. And it's, no one wants to create devastation. But the problem is that there's not a solution at the moment that we can see on the horizon that can bring this to an end, because we signed the MOU and the United States was supposed to force the Israeli regime to leave Lebanon and to stop the killing. They didn't do that. They were supposed to immediately hand over Iran's assets. They didn't do that. They were supposed to stop threatening Iranians. In the MOU, it says it. They didn't do that. They were supposed to lift sanctions on Iran's oil exports. They lifted it for a week and then they returned it. They reimposed it. Another violation. Then they went and expanded the sanctions. They imposed new sanctions. This was all during those 2 weeks, those 2-3 weeks, and which was another violation. And then ultimately, after doing all that, they went and tried to create a corridor of their own in the Strait of Hormuz, which is a violation of Article 5. Iran was to normalize trade in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran was to control the Strait of Hormuz. But the Americans and the Saudis, the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis, they went and created an alternative corridor. Iran warned them time after time, and then finally Iran had to strike 3 of those ships after many warnings, because that was a violation of the deal. So when the Americans are violating everything and then ultimately restarting the war, then what is that paper worth? And then if tomorrow we sign another piece of paper with the Americans, what's the worth of that paper? How much is it worth? So a solution becomes much more difficult, because when it is Iran and Brazil, and the two leaders say they don't even have to write a piece of paper. If on the phone, the president of Brazil and the president of Iran agree that something will happen, it will happen. They don't need to follow up on it and say, you lied here, you didn't do it. The two sides, when they say they'll do it, they'll do it. If it's between the Iranian president and the Chinese president, it'll be done. It may be slow, there may be some bureaucratic obstacles that have to be resolved, but the intention will be to do it. In the case of Trump and the United States in general, this is not just Trump, but Trump is more crude than previous presidents. But when it's the United States, their signature doesn't mean anything. I mean, Obama, when he signed the JCPOA, when his government signed the JCPOA, they didn't abide by their commitments, never, from day one. But Obama was much more sophisticated than Trump, so he could get away with it. And of course, many people wouldn't know, and they would think that the United States is actually abiding by its obligations. So this is going to be very difficult. There is a possibility for a deal, but only if Trump is forced into implementing his side of the bargain. And from my understanding, if there's a new deal, Iran will be demanding certain things up front, and it will probably add things to the deal, such as Yemen, such as Gaza, and it won't be like the MOU. The Iranians will be demanding more, but as I said, they'll be demanding certain things up front so that the Americans won't be able to refrain from implementing the deal.
Cyrus.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the one thing that is remarkable right now is how the United States has lost their credibility in this entire war. And I think it's really coming out here in the wash here, domestically in the United States. We've seen a lot of interesting things. For example, the mayor of New York City has come out with a very strong statement, basically calling Netanyahu a war criminal, stating that, under the ICC, there is an arrest for his warrant, and that, if Netanyahu were to ever come to New York City, that they would certainly execute that, warrant, and that they would certainly arrest him. And what I'm really seeing right now, and I think it's a difficult position for the United States, is the tide is turning most specifically under people under the age of 30. The young Americans have really become very frustrated because they're trapped in this middle of this economy. They're in a position where they can't afford housing. They can't afford the rising costs of living that are so astronomical here in the United States. They're seeing a government that is, really putting Israeli interest above our own interest. And I think that is a very difficult thing. I mean, I saw, for example, a news clip from the professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, where he was debating Piers Morgan. And he just simply said, look, Iran is not our enemy. For example, I'm an American. I believe in America first. And this war is not putting America first. But there's the only propaganda that can come from the Trump administration, is in regards to a nuclear bomb. This is a similar thing that we see is, look, we have to do this because Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon. And if they have a nuclear weapon, they're going to use it against the United States. And that's really the only thing that Trump is kind of clinging on right now. But I think, what's interesting here is I like you stating to our audience that Iran doesn't want to strangle the global economy. It's not their goal to wreak havoc on the global economy. Obviously, they want to find a way to work. They want to make sure that they can, they have to put Iran first. And again, they were attacked. Iran was attacked first. The United States made the first move. What my next question, Professor, would be in relation to this nuclear weapon. And I think this is just an important thing to get out, because I want you to really help more people understand what is Iran's, goal right now with uranium. What is their goal with this nuclear, potential bomb, and what is the sentiment going on right now in Tehran regarding this? How are the Iranians looking at this particular issue moving forward?
Well, in addition to that book, Going to Tehran, which I would really like the two of you to read too and tell me what you think, and the book by Alistair Crook, Resistance. There are two books on the Iranian nuclear program that I think are worthy of reading. One is called A Dangerous Delusion by Peter Oborn, who is a very serious journalist in the UK, a conservative journalist. And the second is by Gareth Porter, called Manufactured Crisis. And it says a lot about the nuclear program. If people read it, they'll understand that the West is very dishonest in its whole approach towards the program itself. The program began before the revolution, and the Iranians paid a lot of money, too much money, to Western companies to build the nuclear program. And when the revolution happened, for the first decade, they didn't do much because they were busy defending the country against Saddam Hussein, which the West supported and who invaded the country. But afterwards, they saw that they had this infrastructure that was half built. Billions of dollars had been spent, and back then, which would be, I guess, tens of billions of dollars now. And they had trained many thousands of people for this, so they decided to take it forward. And of course, the United States tried to block it, so the Iranians had to try to push this forward quietly and silently. And if you look at Iran post-revolution, not pre-revolution, it is a country that has always been trying to develop in the high-tech industries. So, for example, in nanotechnology, Iran is one of the top countries in the world. In stem cell research in general, and as we see in the military, Iranian missiles and drones are among the best in the world. So the nuclear program is a high-tech industry, and the Iranians were pursuing it just as they've been pursuing other areas. Iran is also building large clean energy programs as they're developing them as well, including solar energy and so on. But the United States made the nuclear program, and the Israeli regime in particular, Netanyahu, for over 3 decades has been saying that Iran is a year or two away from a nuclear weapon. For, I think, like 33 years now. He's been saying Iran is weeks away, a couple of years away, a year away, a few months away from the early 1990s, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, people can just use AI, DeepSeek or anything else to look at the list of the things that have been said and when they've been saying them. So these lies have been promoted in order to corner